Okay, now it seems to actually be working.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're
Nice.
good.
All right, should we just go?
Let's go.
Now I forget. It's been a while, so I forget what we usually lead with. All right.
Yeah, you just say hi, and then I guess we'll.
Yeah. All right, let's go. Hello and welcome to Product Club. Hans Martin, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. It's a sunny day outside. With finally, kind of summer has come to Oslo, which feels very strange because it's very warm, and I guess kind of our guest today can see kind of on we have video on, right, so you can see kind of we're a bit red in our faces.
Yeah, a bit sunburned. We're not used to this weather.
Yeah, I'm not used to this one. It's supposed to be cold. This doesn't work. Oh.
So that's the weather update from Hans Martin. Yeah, so I just can't wait to bring in our guest today from San Francisco. This is Vijay from Mixpanel. Hello, Vijay.
Hi there. How's it going? Great to be
Very
here.
good. So let's just start with you. Tell us about you and who you are and what you do.
Yeah, great to be here. I'm Vijay. I run the product management and product marketing teams at Mixpanel. I'm based out of San Francisco, California, so it's pretty sunny all the time. So no surprises here. I've been at Mixpanel about 5.5 years. Originally joined on one of the infrastructure engineering teams, and then spent a bunch of time in engineering and engineering leadership before moving into product leadership a little over a year ago. And then before that, I was at Uber as a software engineer on the one of the internal tools team, specifically around making data really accessible throughout the company. So I've been spending a lot of time thinking about data and product and how to build great teams working on products. So excited to chat about that today.
Thank you. So good to have you here. So tell us a little bit about Mixpanel for those who don't know what it is.
Yeah, definitely. So Mixpanel is a product analytics company. Essentially, we help EPD teams, that is engineering, product, and design teams, build really great products by giving everyone really powerful and easy to use analytics that everyone can really trust and align on. So Mixpanel fundamentally lets you track events about how your end users are using your product, how they're going through your sign-up flow or converting to some key events, and then take those events and measure really important behavioral metrics like engagement, frequency, conversion rate in a funnel, or long-term retention, and then really be able to slice and dice those metrics to get to root causes and prioritize what you want to do next. And then finally, when you ship products and you make changes to your product, you should be able to see, did it work? Did it have an impact? Should I pivot? Should I double down? So that's kind of how a lot of our customers are using Mixpanel to build better products.
Thank you so much. And that sounds like exactly the kind of tool that PMs need, right? So I hope our listeners have tried it, and I have, but it's been a few years, to be honest, but I really liked it. So actually, that's why we're here today. You mentioned engineering, product, and design, and that's what we want to talk about today. So that product trio of engineering, design, product. How do you work together? What kind of challenges are there? What responsibilities do you have, etc. So we've all had this different experiences with that, good and bad, I suspect. I'd really love to hear your side of that story, also because you come from engineering, as you said. So I think we want to cover a lot of things around that trio, but what if we start with what is it? So what is the product trio of engineering, product, and design?
Yeah, definitely. This is one of my favorite topics. So at Mixpanel, we call this group EPD, engineering product design. And yeah, it's just kind of been a long tradition at Mixpanel, and I think at a lot of our customers, companies as well, where EPD works really closely together in these cross-functional pods. So the way it works for us is that we have our overall we have an engineering team led by our VP of engineering. We have product and design that rolls up into our VP product and design, and but we all plan kind of collectively together and figure out for a given year what are our key strategic initiatives, right? Like what are the key things that we want to accomplish at the end of the year, and define some key goals and metrics. And each of those initiatives is staffed by a product manager, a designer, a design lead, and then an engineering team or multiple engineering teams. And then we separately have a kind of platform engineering team that sits below that supports our infrastructure and things like that. But yeah, each of these pods is kind of oriented around that one mission that we set out at the beginning of the year, and it has that trio of PM, designer, engineering team, and then they plan together, they prioritize together, they ship products together, they do retrospectives together, and so there's like a lot of trust within that trio. So that's kind of how it works at Mixpanel, and I'm happy to go into a lot more depth on that as well.
So how long do these pods normally work together as one team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that we try to keep true is that we try to make sure that the pods are as long-lived as possible, or rather they map to areas of our product or product strategy that are essentially never-ending investment areas for us, right? Like it would never not make sense to have a pod. For Mixpanel, for example, one of the pods is analysis, and it's really focused on beating that power simplicity trade-off in analytics. How can we be really powerful but also really easy to use? And that's kind of a never-ending area of investment for us, which is valuable from a team structure standpoint because it minimizes the chances of there being like a reorg and reshuffling who you work with, and allows these teams to stay really close to the customer context as it relates to their strategy, and build that over not just quarters but years, right? And then similarly, we have one that's focused on like our product-led growth strategy of how can users get into the product and get into value without having to talk to anyone or even leave their credit card, like just getting from like seamless onboarding experience. And again, that's like a never-ending area of investment for us because we always want that to be better and smoother and faster. And there's a really big ambitious goal there that we can spend years before reaching it. So I think that team structure is roughly quite stable over the years. I think within that, there are strategic initiatives of, okay, this year, what do we want to do to make analysis better, or what do we want to do? And that I think each team can decide and propose, but that's independent of the team structure a little bit because it happens within that broader charter. So that's the way that we think about it. Yeah.
So the ownership sounds pretty strong then, that each team has a really, really strong ownership of their problem area, would you say?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, like I think ownership comes from time and building this deep sense of context. So it's really about what is the set of mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive areas so that people aren't stepping on each other's toes, or there's not should they do this, should we do this kind of thing. But then simultaneously, it should be clear. It shouldn't be like gigantic area it has no clarity at all. So that's right. Kind of the trade-off that we try to strike. That said, I'm kind of curious if there's other ways that you both have seen it.
Yeah, Hans Martin, how does it work in ODA? Does it sound familiar?
Yeah, kind of. I was just kind of I was a little bit kind of curious and a bit kind of confused as well, kind of on the team versus kind of pods, right? So did I understand it correctly? If kind of a pod exists of several teams, sort of within, so a pod could be an area, or is the pod the team? So.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a good clarification. So from a reporting structure standpoint, I think we report into our functional leads. So like there's an engineering org, and there's engineers that report into their, some engineering manager reports into a director, reports into a VP. The design team, all the IC designers report into our director of design. All the IC PMs report to me. So that's the, I guess, management hierarchy and team structure. And then these are kind of like the cross-functional sort of areas, like bets that we're making as a company. And so there's I guess it's kind of like the matrix management, right? Like you need to have your engineers report to engineers, but then you work together with the people in this.
So in that case, so in that case, kind of the discipline is kind of the team, right? So
exactly,
your product management team. So okay, yeah, great. Because we talk about it a little bit differently, because we talk about kind of the discipline, and then we talk about teams. So the pod kind of context doesn't necessarily kind of exist in ODA, at least, but we talk about kind of teams and then areas sort of teams. So we have, for instance, in my domain, which is kind of the shop platform, we call that, we have we have three areas, which basically kind of covers the range of products that we have. So we have kind of what we call customer experience. We have something called Discover and Inspire, which is basically kind of product discovery inside the shop, and then we have master data and assortment, sort of, which is kind of the third area. And below these kind of areas, you have several teams that are cross-functional teams that would kind of act on whatever kind of mission would be within those individual teams and areas. So it kind of feels very similar and very kind of much the same. You have also kind of the same kind of discipline reporting lines, right? That goes up to
Exactly. Yeah.
to kind of the sea level on top there. But yeah, but I feel like this is kind of the I think it would be hard to kind of find a tech company of size that don't have kind of a structure like this, at least kind of to some degree, because it feels like it's kind of the law. Like if you start kind of a company of a tech company of some sort, you need kind of to have this trio or kind of this kind of cross-functional setup, and then team it up, and then kind of put it in within an area and make I don't know, awesome things happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the ideal is so in modern tech companies, yes, but you'd be surprised of how many that
Right.
don't have a functioning way of working like this. But yes, I think most strive to. But I've definitely worked places where that trio doesn't exist, so where there's one person that does both design and product, sometimes even engineering, right? So this sounds like a well-functioning way to structure it. But have you had any issues with it, Vijay? Like, are there any instances where there are problems with this trio?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think there's one thing is the trio enough, or should you add even more to it? So one thing that we've done in the last couple of quarters actually is having product marketing, which used to live under marketing and now lives under product, actually join this trio. And so it's, I guess, no longer quite a trio, but it's having someone thinking about how will customers discover this, and how will we drive adoption, and how will we tell the story about this whatever we're building externally, and having that person. What used to happen is that the trio would go build the thing and then toss it over the fence to marketing and then say, okay, go, write some blog post about this or something. And then they're like, wait, there's no way to be strategic about that, right? It's very tactical and reactive. But if we can make storytelling a superpower of ours and bake that into the beginning, so that it's before we even build something, thinking about what's the press release going to say, and then work backwards from that. So I think that's one thing we've observed in the past that didn't work that we're trying to fix now, which is bringing marketing and storytelling and targeting the right persona all the way at the very beginning or integrating it into the product development process. So I think that's
definitely something I've had experience with as well. In my previous job at Vips, that is exactly what we needed to do. There was a huge gap between go-to-market and the actual building and the product teams. And there was actually some tension there because we didn't want to let it go. Like the teams were kind of protective of the thing.
right.
And then marketing came in and they didn't have the context or the backstory, and it was hard for them to do their job. So it actually worked really well when we started integrating a product marketing person into the teams. So yes, definitely recommend that.
Yeah, I'd say that's one area, and I don't know how common that is. I've heard different things from different product leaders I've talked to. Some of them have product marketing and product, and some of them it's its own function, which has other valuable reasons for existing. I think the other piece that I'm not actually sure if this is even the way we've done it is the right way, but one thing we struggled with in the past was having the pods have a really narrow and very specific charter of, we want to go build this specific type of product, or this new developer platform thing, or this new API or something like that. And it happens to take a long amount of time. So we think, okay, let's just staff a pod that's all about building this and iterating on this. But the challenge there is, what if that whole premise is wrong, or you learn something in the middle? And it's very, very hard for that pod of people to self-identify and say, actually, there's no reason for us to exist anymore. We should actually go do something else. It requires really painful intervention to shake that up. And I think so. You have to be really careful at, like, what how certain are you that this is going to be long lived for like 2 years? And even if individual efforts fail, you would still want this group to be intact to solve the underlying problem. So basically shaping it around problems, like long lived problems, as opposed to bets or hypothetical solutions. It's, I guess, another trade.
Yeah, I think you're touching upon the thing there, which we discuss a lot in Oda, and yeah, you talked about kind of being four people in kind of the triangle, right? So kind of into a square, kind of.
Yeah.
But we're discussing that with the data discipline, so data science and data analytics, right? Because we do have a lot of teams that do a lot of recommendations, for instance, and for them, kind of the data side of the question is that's a very kind of strategic role also in these teams, right? So why aren't kind of they part of the trio or then the square or whatever kind of we want to end up calling it? So that's a big debate, so we've ended up basically kind of having teams with actual kind of four leads, sort of, in a sense, not necessarily married to kind of the trio concept, or it doesn't necessarily kind of have to be kind of all of the trio as well, but kind of the data discipline is kind of making their appearance sort of in that team structure. And then I guess kind of where it's a bit different kind of how data science and data analytics is structured across different companies, though. But we have them very much kind of embedded into the individual teams. So that kind of makes for kind of a natural conversation about who actually decides what's in the team, right? And especially when you have kind of strong data teams or data producing teams. In the company as well. So I'm a bit kind of curious to hear that if that conversation is at Mixpanel as well, because I mean, if there's a data heavy company, then I guess kind of you guys are are in that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and actually something that we're building that practice as well. I think one of the things we've been able to leverage is so I think, yeah, I guess stepping back, I think that is a missing piece typically of that EPD trio. Like, you do need that deep, level 5 insight of like getting to the root cause of why behind the why are we building this? How will we know we're going to be successful? We shipped an experiment, did it work? And like actually getting real about whether it actually worked, or these are just like, correlated metrics that will go up. And I think one of the things we've been able to leverage is that we of course use Mixpanel on Mixpanel, right? So our engineers, product managers, designers are using our own product every day, and so we have all that data flowing in. And the whole point of the tool is to be self-serve, so that you don't have to write SQL, or you don't have to go like the 80% of relatively basic questions that I think a lot of the data teams often are overqualified to be answering, but spend their time answering anyway. Like, how many unique users did we have that used this and then used something else in last week? And did that change compared to 2 months ago? And, what is the 7-week retention of some feature? Those are the types of questions that are really easy to formulate in your head, but really annoying to answer. And I think because we have Mixpanel on all of our data, we can just answer them really fast. And so that type of ad hoc question answer is quite fast. I will say that the thing I think still have, we're building this data function that is starting to embed, is the more like longer term strategic questions of like, how should we evolve pricing, or what correlates most with net dollar based retention, and what behavior should we be encouraging like our customer success team to go look at, and what can we do in the product to make that easier, and things like that. The really strategic meaty questions, we definitely do need that data presence. It's just kind of, we've been able to get away with it without that embedded into all the teams, because we have the self-serve analytics tool that we ourselves are building. So
yeah, because
but also where
go ahead, Halina. Sorry.
Also, where is the line between having like advisory members of the team kind of I mean, what's the difference of having a larger kind of affiliated team? Sorry, I'm trying to rephrase this. So the trio, I guess the point of the trio is to have less people deciding, right? There's 3 people that can actually make decisions to get the speed that you want. But I guess most teams have more than 3, so you have different disciplines as an extended team. So isn't that a good model? I mean, does everyone have to be a lead in the team? Like, can you just have data as an advisory function?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think It's actually not just data. Depending on like some of our teams, like we have a pod that's focused on collaboration and driving adoption of the enterprise. And there, the cross-functional partner is our customer success leaders, right?
Yeah.
And like they're not, daily into the stand-ups of all the teams, but
Yeah.
there is that alignment there.
Or compliance and stuff like that you need sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, so I think there's some of that as well. I think that with data, I think the tricky piece is maybe the way I think about it is there's two types of ways in which you use data. There's the ad hoc day-to-day questions that arise constantly that just need to be answered to unblock the team. Like, hey, we want to decide, like, is this a priority or is this one, or should we cut this out of scope, or how do we decide which users are going to use this, or who should we show this message to in product, or things like that. That the key thing is that you need to empower the people that have all the context, the surrounding context about that, to answer those questions, because otherwise the cost of transferring context to some data expert will outweigh the that like value of the speed at which you need to make the decision. And so it ends up not really working because there's such a high volume of these and you need the context. The flip side is that you have a small set of really, really critical decisions where, like precision and correctness and like depth goes beyond any sort of speed. And you also need to take a cross-cutting look of the whole business, because the decision might be, actually, we need to stop investing in this area altogether. So it's not even about like the existing day-to-day context. You need to step beyond that. And I think that's where having that data presence is really valuable. I don't know if I really answered your question about like.
Yeah, but this is interesting, Vijay, because there's something here about the triangle as kind of being or EPD though to be kind of effective for decision making, right? But the other part of it is to be kind of effective as kind of a producing kind of team, right? So to actually kind of get to somewhere, and that isn't necessarily kind of always kind of decision making, right? That could be kind of all the other things that sits in a team context to actually be like you said, you kind of having the context for what you actually do and having the ability to actually do what you do, right? So I'm also kind of this is kind of an everlasting kind of conversation in Oda as well. Like do we need leads for everything? So which is always kind of and I guess kind of this is the product manager's kind of how to say, the burden, in a sense that you are in fact often at least kind of set as kind of some kind of accountable kind of lead for team or area or something like that, so you have kind of decision making power, and then everybody else want to be involved, right, in that conversation, and then you kind of want to also kind of give them the space, and suddenly kind of you have leads all over the place that is kind of part of the conversation and wants to decide stuff as well, and then that gets muddy, and as you said, Vijay, we also have kind of these people in the fringes. So we have kind of a commercial department that does kind of all merchandising stuff, right? And we have a growth department, kind of, and all of them are kind of also embedded into kind of teams. So you have kind of suddenly kind of very large teams doing kind of all kinds of cross-functional stuff, right? So how does this kind of I guess kind of you have conversation about this, how this actually scales sort of as a model, right, internally as well.
Right. Yeah. How do you get decision making to scale? Is that the?
Yeah. Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, ultimately, I think this is something that I've personally struggled with as a product leader as well. Is sometimes I just end up taking the burden of making the decision, like a lot of the decisions, so that it can move fast. But then it doesn't really work, and it definitely doesn't scale, and it's not empowering at all. And that's been a learning for me as well. And I think probably the only way that it can work is pushing down context as far as it is reasonable to go, and then empowering teams to make the decisions. Like basically, people closest to all the context should be able to make the decision. The only reason they're not going to make a great decision is because they don't have the full range of context. So then it's setting up the information structures in the system such that they can make great decisions. And that's kind of like managing the information diet of everybody on the team. And that's a mixture of setting them up with the right cross-functional partners, as you mentioned, getting the right information streams. Like one is Mixpanel, of course, quantitative data, but there's much more than that. There's the qualitative customer feedback, right? Like the voice of the customer in a particular domain, and like making sure they're consuming those feeds. Like we have a bunch of automation set up where every piece of NPS feedback or feature requests or things like that flow into Slack, and they flow into Notion, and it's really easy to follow, like keep up basically with that stream. And in an ideal world, each of those teams should have like beautifully filtered stream for their own focus area and their North Star metric. And so they should be the experts. And so they should be able to make the decisions. And then for me, it's just about like aligning the team and making sure they have access to that information. So I think
Yeah,
that's
I think
one, just like
you're very
pushing that
right
down.
about that information. But even though you have all the information, so in some cases there's room for interpreting that information, right? So as a designer who focuses more on user research, for instance, you might hear something in that research that the engineer doesn't, kind of. And sometimes there are these differences of opinion, and how can you solve that as a product manager, basically? Do you have any advice on how you can manage those situations, because it's not always that everyone agrees?
Yeah, that is definitely true. And that there's some element of just product sense and taste and
Yeah.
the subjective elements. I think that's all okay as long as one, you as a company or as a product org are all rowing in the same direction. And so you have, I think that's where principles come in, or some sense of a product vision come in, where you say, this is just the type of thing we do. Like in Mixpanel, like one of our principles is around, we want to have like this really composable design where it's really low floor because users have to only learn a few building blocks, but really high ceiling because those building blocks all compose with each other. And so that's just a leveraged way to design a product. And it's hard, and it's much harder than just stamping out different features for every single use case, because we have to think about, can we compose these existing building blocks or evolve one? But then the value is that it all composes well together and the product all makes sense together, even though there's 4 teams building it, right? And so it's one of those, I guess, forced trades that we're making. Yeah, we're going to move a little bit more slowly, but we have to think about it in this term, or thinking about it in this term of like, can we expose context to the user so they make the right decision rather than forcing them down some path or being rigid in a certain way, things like that. So I think, principles and aligning on principles from top down a bit, and then context coming bottom up is probably the right way. Not saying we've done a perfect job or anything. It's like constantly a work in progress, but that's the way we're thinking about it.
Yeah, you're right. So if there are opinions, subjective opinions, and then you can tie it to a principle or to a goal and say, okay, well, which of these will move this goal or this metric or ties well with our principles. I think that's a good point. So let's move back a little bit. I wanted to just step back and talk a little bit more about the actual jobs that you do. So what does a designer do in this pod? What does an engineer do? And what does a product lead, product manager do? Because we assume here that everyone knows all about this stuff, but for any new listeners, maybe just say a little bit more about those responsibilities and where does one start and where does it end, kind of.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I'll give the idealized view and then talk about what happens in practice. But in the ideal world, I think the PM brings the what and the why of the problem, right? And then they bring that clarity of this is the problem we see. This is the reach and the depth of the pain point that's experienced by our customers. This is why it aligns with our vision, and this is the opportunity that we unlock by solving that problem. And so it's a mixture of defining it and also presenting it in a way that really motivates and excites the team and gets people bought in. Because I think that's one of the unique things about being a PM is you're leading purely through influence, and so you need to be able to provide that context and get that buy-in.
I love that. I've talked to so many people about this, like what does a PM do? And I think that the influencing bit is so important. So I love that you use that.
Definitely,
because you don't have any formal leadership most of the time, so you need to influence.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the engineering side, I think it's really about, well, I guess I'll go to design first. So design is really about taking that problem, and I think there's 2 pieces there. One is actually enhancing the storytelling. I think this is actually kind of an underrated aspect of design, and in part why I think tools like Figma have really exploded the field of product design, where it brought designers a seat at the table to tell the story of the problem and the user journey and the workflow in a way that aligns people way better than like a Google Doc does, because no one reads Google Docs, but people do look at prototypes and they do like deeply understand it when they see it visually. So I think that's one piece is putting workflows and prototypes to tell the story, and the second is solving it from like the user's perspective and thinking about what is like a 10 out of 10 or 11 out of 10 user experience that we can build to solve this problem. And then the engineering team is really about the making it possible, like the how and the when and how fast and under what constraints can we actually invent on behalf of the user to make that design possible, right? And so that's really the like how do you actually implement the solution, put it in production, make sure it scales, and then make sure it's robust and you don't have to look at it again and it'll just keep working. That obviously sounds like this waterfall approach where the PM comes with the problem and then the designer does some stuff and then they hand it to engineering and they build and then it's done. In reality, I think if you build products that way, you end up missing a lot of these micro feedback loops that are really important. And in reality, I think all three need to be involved. I'd say probably the PM and designer need to be involved at the very earliest stages, and then well before you start building, you need to bring the engineer in to think about the constraints and what's actually possible, and is there a pricing implication, and what what can happen. And oftentimes, I think with really good triads or trios like this, you'll find that the engineer can tell you, oh, actually, we can actually do this even better than we thought because of some breakthrough we can do, and oh, it turns out we can make this even better because we can leverage this other system. And it's the same with design. They can actually like level up what you can do. The risk there is that they also can blow up scope and think about like, oh, but we have to do this refactor and we have to do this and we have to do this. And I think that's part of where the product manager is kind of like, no, let's stay focused on the problem and make sure that we're going, this is the number one thing, and allow for a little bit of expansion of scope, but stay really focused on we're trying to do this and we'll learn this and then we'll have this impact. So it's really a fluid dynamic, I guess. There's no perfect thing. That's kind of how I see it all fitting together. And typically, though.
Yeah, I think that's a very good explanation for it. And you mentioned kind of the engineering maybe not being at the start of every initiative, but do you think they should be in the research phase, like you actually talking to customers or at least listening in? And do you think that's important?
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone should be consuming, at least be part of the consuming that information diet of the research and thinking about it. I guess it's not a rule of thumb that engineers shouldn't be involved. I also, as a former engineer, I think one of the pieces of feedback that I got actually when I moved is, as an engineer, you often tend to immediately conflate the R and the I in ROI. And so as you're exploring like, oh, these are really high potential possible things. One thing I used to do, or maybe I probably still do this, is I think about, okay, but we have to cut scope here because it's going to be really hard to build and like it's not going to take enough time. But you need a little bit of space to just think big and think beyond that, because maybe you'll find some new global maxima that it makes it possible. And so I guess that was a hurdle I'm like overcoming right now. And so that's something that I think engineers just bring to the table, which is really, really good on the scoping and building side, but can be really hard to balance when thinking vision and thinking about what could this be.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I've had some experience with that as well, where engineering kind of comes off as being negative, but they're of course just being realistic, right? But sometimes you don't want to hear that as a product manager when you're in this like thinking big phase. So yeah, a little bit of both is probably good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get those conversations that never seem to end of like, oh, but what if it could be this? But no, it can't. But what if? But it can't. And then you can never move forward. Yeah. So
sounds familiar, the whole thing. Yeah. One question here, Vijay. So you mentioned that your kind of journey has gone kind of from engineering, right, and then over to product management, and I guess kind of I came straight into kind of product management from kind of and Halina, you were a designer before I kind of came into product management, right? So we kind of all have kind of these different backgrounds into this job, but I wanted to kind of hear your kind of journey there, like what is that experience like going from engineering to product management? It seems like it's kind of the not necessarily kind of the easiest kind of threshold to pass, kind of, because it feels like very kind of distinct areas. Like design and product management is so much more kind of fluid together. Kind of it kind of feels like they fit better. But how has that journey kind of been for you, and how does that kind of influence kind of the way that you look at this trio, for instance, the EPD trio?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me personally, one thing is that Mixpanel is a pretty technical product, and even on the infrastructure side, we actually used it internally for quite a lot of things. So I'd like looked this up before I switched to product. I'd used Mixpanel on 95% of all weekdays that I was working in the previous year. So it's like I was pretty in the product as well and using all the features and things like that. And the second thing is that I've worked with some really great PMs at Mixpanel, and they really brought me into the product development process from the earliest stages. So I had already been spending a lot of time talking to customers and thinking about, because from my standpoint, I was an engineering manager before moving, and from my standpoint, I wanted to make sure that everybody on the team, on my engineering team, was working on the highest impact things. So I was kind of like always pushing our PM, and that they were always looping me in to just make sure that was the case, because it was, that then the promotion packet writes itself for that engineer, because I could just fill it with Mixpanel links and show all these graphs with impact, and then it's done. So that it was kind of this mutually beneficial thing of just like, let's make sure we're working on this impactful product. So I was anyway spending a lot of time on that. So that said, yeah, I think the main challenge is that coming from engineering, you're always thinking about the how. How do you build this, and like what exactly are you building? And like you're looking for the precise mechanics of the thing, as opposed to the why and the like what could be possible in theory if we just shed all of our current constraints. And then thinking more broadly than just, engineering is the only way to solve the problem. There's plenty of ways. You can write documentation to solve the problems. You can enable the sales team to solve the problems. You can change copy in certain places, and that might do it. You can change navigation and solve the problem. And so that was the other piece that I think
that's true.
You have so many more tools in your toolkit in product if you're thinking that broadly and you can make it work. So that was another eye-opening thing for me coming from engineering, where it's like, the only solution is writing code, and then you want to resist writing code as much as possible, because every code you write immediately becomes debt and tech debt like a week later, right? So you want to resist that as much as possible. But anyway, so I think that those are a couple of things.
And you've never regretted the switch?
No, I've not.
Leading question.
No, definitely not. I think I've learned a lot, and it's also doing it in the same company is good, because there's a lot of context and a lot of existing trust that's built and structures that are there, which is really valuable. But
yeah, I think that's an interesting point you made there about sometimes the engineering, your partner in engineering as a product manager is sometimes they're just there to tell you not to build something.
Yeah.
Which is also super valuable, that so you, like you just said, you can actually solve this in many other ways. And that's what you lose if you bring in engineering too late, when you've already decided what you should build.
Right.
So I've
exactly.
had many like eye-opening experiences where they're like, what have you done this? And that actually saves us like months of engineering. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's
I guess, Helena, I'm curious. You had the opposite experience moving from design to product. Well,
yeah.
what was that transition like?
I was from UX design, so that was actually, I found it quite fluid, as Martin said, but also because it was sort of in the early stages of UX design, especially here in Oslo, when there's basically just one person dealing with both kind of product owner stuff, project management, and also designing the thing. And then I had developers on my team, but I was the only other person. So I'd already done most of these tasks before I actually knew what product management was. So for me, it was more of a, like, things clicked together when I realized, okay, this is product management, and then I can actually influence a lot more than when I was a UX designer. That was because you're closer to the business as well. You're closer to the big decision making in the company, which you sometimes lose as a designer, actually. So I love going to product, but of course, some people love to hone their craft a bit more and be more specific on what their skills are and be really good at interviewing, for instance. But I like to dabble in a lot of different things, so product is perfect for that. But it's crucial to have those partners, like those really good designers and engineers to guide you. That was a long answer, but yeah. So I just kind of I was so happy when I found out that I could actually, this is a job, like this is a perfect position for me. So so I'm trying to, of course, with this podcast as well, really get people to do product management, because it's so much fun.
No, it really is. Yeah. Actually, one other point I'll add, since you touched on the word influence again, which I think is really important. That was a big learning for me moving from engineering to product, is in engineering, again, I could just tell everybody on the team. I mean, not like that as a manager, you're just telling people what to do, but you can do that, and you are leading a bit by just fiat or being a manager versus in product, you're leading by influence, and that didn't really click for me until, and I was able to leverage the existing relationships I had for a while, like a short amount of time, to say, okay, like maybe we should do this, we should do this. But then past that point, I had to still had to convince everybody and get buy-in. And that's where I developed a different relationship with our own product, with Mixpanel, because if you boil it down, it's like, yeah, to make day-to-day decisions, but also to socialize those decisions in a way that everyone's bought in on the impact, and it's kind of quantifiable of like, oh, we can make this number go here and it'll unlock this level of growth in the funnel, which will unlock this thing. And that gets the team really excited because they can see the line go up, and it's like, oh, I did this. And that's, so in a weird way, I think that's like data helps influence, even though like influence seems like this fuzzy thing. It really, it can be a science, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a super good example, kind of using your own product, right, to actually kind of get buy-in from everyone. And I guess kind of I always have. I was visiting another podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me kind of what I do. Well, I'm a product manager. So what is a product manager? And I have such a hard time kind of explaining what a product manager is. So I kind of usually say, well, let's not spend time on that. I'll tell you kind of what we can do, so instead, and not talk about what product management is. But I think kind of the influencing part, and there also kind of this storytelling, kind of embedded storytelling in how you talk about the product that you actually trying to get people to I don't know, do something with, right, or expand, or kind of explore, do something. That storytelling skill, kind of understanding deeply how that product actually works and why it exists, and how you should use it to kind of get the same kind of level of experience that we have as kind of the happy happy product managers here. That is kind of, when that kind of clicks, then you kind of that's a superpower basically for a product manager.
And I think that's also another example of why a product marketing person could be so valuable, because they actually take that kind of missionary thing that you do as a PM, they translate it into something customers can use, right? So a good product marketing person will translate what the team loves about the product, and it's kind of working backwards from the press release kind of feeling, like, what do you want the end result? What is the perfect thing about this product that you're trying to tell people? And actually, it's not that hard to use that as marketing, but you need to have those people that can switch it a little bit, because most PMs aren't great at also writing or talking externally about things. Like you shouldn't expect the PM to be able to do all that, but some can, of course, but product marketing really helps.
Yeah, I think even if they are good at writing and presenting, the challenge is that so often they're so in the weeds of the problem solving. There's like this trap of assuming that the hardest problem you had to solve to make this product a reality is the thing that customers care most about, even though what they care most about is like, it's valuable to stay a little higher level with, exactly, not get too in the weeds. And sometimes you get so in the weeds, it's hard to be at multiple levels of abstraction at the same time. I think is the challenge. Product marketing can kind of keep you real. It's like, no, this is what the market thinks, and this is what they want, and like, let's just frame it that way, which is just like a breath of fresh air.
Sounds like we're really selling that function now, but
no, it's great.
But I wanted to, I mean, before we start wrapping up, I wanted to hear, like we've talked about the pods in a long-term kind of way, but what happens when there's a completely new initiative, something that is very uncertain? So how do you staff it? What do you do then with the existing pods, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually something that we have right now going on, where we had this very risky. I wouldn't say risky from the standpoint of feasibility risk, but just risky from like, are we sure this is exactly the thing that the market wants? And it's really tricky to justify getting a full engineering team and getting everyone there ready to build. You want to de-risk that as much as possible, and like, you essentially want to have an OKR that's more like a learning OKR. Like, can we just learn more about the space as quickly as possible and try a bunch of things and throw them away cheaply? And building something with an engineering team is the least cheap way to do that, right?
Mm.
So I think the answer there is what we've tried to do is just have just at one PM or one person go off and think about like one, either figure out can we try this for our own internal use of Mixpanel and like dog food this new bet that we're trying to do in a really lightweight way. It doesn't have to be all fleshed out. It's just like, is there a kernel of something possible here? Second is using like just talking to customers and talking to customers that are at the right level of on like that crossing the chasm curve, like at the early adopters or the visionaries that'll fund our vision even if it doesn't fully exist yet and are willing to take a half baked product and then and really iterate with that small group. And then third is just like marketing and documentation and those lighter weights to just put out a feeler. Like, is there value in this thing? So I think starting there and just getting more and more certainty, like, measure twice, cut once type thing. And then only once you have some certainty of like, okay, we ourselves would use this, it's really valuable. There's like some early visionaries that see this and there's traction, then, fund it
But do
with
you
the whole
have
team.
then PMs that are always available for these kinds of initiatives, or do you hire for them, or how do you choose
Yeah.
who to?
Yeah, I think it's really tricky to hire someone to do that, like hire someone fresh and then say go on this risky initiative.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we in our case, we have a PM that it's not like they're always on it, but it was just part of that charter, and then this is like an area within their charter, and it's kind of there. And then simultaneously, I think there's also this trap of, oh, the engineers have nothing to do, so like let's invent work for them to do, and even if it's risky. And engineers always have things to do. There's performance work, there's tech debt work, there's so many things we would do if we had the time. And as former engineer, we would always complain like we never have time to go back and do tech debt work. And so now you can give them the time while you go de-risk stuff. So I think there's some creative things you have to do there in terms of, that's one. And then second is when you're making the risky bets, getting really clear like what is your appetite for that bet. Because oftentimes you think like, oh, this is super risky, but then don't simultaneously say, okay, and so we will try to learn this really fast in 4 weeks and then fail fast if it fails. And then if it succeeds, then double down. And you have to just treat everything like it's a bet, right? And like if you're playing poker, you actually do want to fold most of the time, but you want to maybe like go a few rounds before you fold, things like that. So I don't know if that was a super clear answer, but it was just
no, it was. I think that's interesting. And
managing.
Hans Martin, you mentioned you had an area called discovery, or what did you say? It was.
It's called Discover and Inspire, but basically kind of what that is more kind of on the funnels actually in the product. So discovering the products that we do sell, not necessarily kind of the technical products that we do produce though. So we're in an e-grocery store. I didn't tell you that, Vijay. So so that should probably kind of be a hook on there. But the point there is that you're trying to guide people through the store, both to kind of showing them products, but also kind of showing them inspiration so that they can kind of in the next
right. So discovery in that sense is more in the customer mode,
right? So not necessarily kind of product management kind of product.
So how do you solve then completely new initiatives?
Yeah, that's it. It's a very good and a tricky question because everything in our case has been very new recently. So kind of our short story has been that we started kind of scaling internationally, which meant that kind of the small little team that we had was basically kind of all about kind of scaling this monster of a thing that we had into an international product. And when you do that, you kind of plan with kind of what are these things that we know that we need to kind of put people on, and then you start hiring for that role. So kind of the org chart was kind of predefined in a sense, like here are the teams that we know that we need, and then at some point kind of that org chart is kind of filled up, right, where you don't necessarily kind of have new positions to fill. And that's when kind of that problem starts, right? So what do you do then? And we're not there yet, but very soon. I know that we're gonna have that conversation. So what happens kind of with the existing team structure that we know that might not kind of fit the bill 100%. So how do we kind of start shifting people around and go from kind of the scaling of the thing into kind of the optimization and the improvement of the thing? So that's going to be a new experience for me, kind of in the ODA context now, at least, where it's kind of gradually kind of shifting to the optimization.
And we are doing an episode on scaling, aren't we, at some point? Because especially scaling internationally. So how does a perfectly functioning product team supposed to work when they suddenly have a bunch of new countries and a bunch of new features to handle? So that will be a separate episode, I hope.
Yeah. I hope that we should have kind of in that we should have the kind of the emoji with the exploding head, right? That's basic kind of the feeling of scaling a product like Oda at least.
Okay, so I think we need to start wrapping up. I'd love to talk about this a while longer, but I hope you can maybe join us at some later stage, Vijay. Very interesting talking to you. Is there any final pointers you want to give to fledgling organizations trying to set up this correctly? Like how do you build the perfect teams? That's a huge question, but give us a few tips.
Yeah, definitely. No, this was, first of all, thanks for having me. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed the chat. Always great to talk to other product people. Yeah, I think fledgling organizations trying to set this up. Yeah, probably the biggest thing is establishing, like those key product strategies. Like, how do you want to, fundamentally, it typically boils down to like driving new growth, retaining and engaging your existing customers, and then maybe one or two of these new bets, defining some key metrics for each of those, and building those teams out, engineering, product design, having that trifecta working, really strongly together. Obviously, you want to set up analytics and make sure that you deeply understand your users and define your goals clearly. So definitely check out Mixpanel for that. But yeah, I think it's a journey. It's like, you got to keep evolving and growing over time and staying nimble and adapting. But this is just what's worked for me.
Thank you so much for those great insights. Do you have any final questions, Hans Martin?
No, I think we're good. I think this is super interesting. Always interesting to kind of hear how things work in well-known large organizations such as Mixpanel. So super great for kind of all the insight you shared here today. Very happy about that.
Yeah, and have a great rest of the day. We are now getting ready for our evening here, but you are midday in San Francisco. I expect it to be. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, have a great evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much, Vijay. Bye.
Bye.